Hi guys, welcome to episode number 5 of New Falmouth. I'm Ping Yao, and today we are going to be doing a little bit more kind of road network building and actual building. The last few episodes I've been building bridges. So episode 4 I was building a road bridge, a road swing bridge, and episode 3 I was building a train swing bridge. So I kind of have my fill now of bridges and things like that, and want to get back to basics, which is why I'm doing a little bit of planning where the roads and so forth are going. Now, the area I'm working on is this area here, directly behind the oil depot, which was the original part that I started the city with. And what I want to do here is have the highway on the left side there that you can see is one of the main entry points into the city from the east. It's not the main entry point, but nevertheless it is still an entry point. So what I wanted to do there is to bring the highway eventually right up to the coast, and that will end at a sort of suburb of New Falmouth, I guess, which will be called Sycamore Beach. And Sycamore Beach is going to be a kind of beach resort area, not too beachy, if you know what I mean. It's more kind of like a little beach with a harbour and maybe a little sort of shopping area, mainly residential. So it's more like a suburb of New Falmouth than a kind of independent town in itself. And also there is a road connection from the highway into New Falmouth downtown itself, and that's the road on the right you can see there. So what I needed to do was put down an intersection here so I can connect up the highway, which is known as Highway 2, to the bridge which I built in episode 4, which is the Fort Keene Bridge, if anybody noticed the sign on the side of it. And Fort Keene Bridge, as I say, is one of the main eastern entry points into the city. So this intersection here from Highway 2 to the bridge is quite a key piece of infrastructure. And what I did was looked at, again, Portland, Maine in the States, and I looked at that, and there's an intersection there which I like the look of, and I thought it would probably fit in this area quite nicely. The intersection itself takes up quite a considerable amount of space. This area is fairly hemmed in. You've got hills, quite steep hills on all sides. So there's not a huge amount of space to build, but predominantly this area is going to be pretty much filled up with this intersection, as well as a smaller kind of residential area, which is known as Hunterstown. So I'm starting to kind of work out in my head how the city is going to be sort of coming together, and working out some of the different areas or suburbs of New Falmouth. Now, I'm doing, as I say, I do build my cities in a slightly peculiar way, because I often start on the outside and work in, whereas I think most people start in the middle, i.e. the downtown, and work out. So I'm doing this in a slightly odd way, but I do hope in maybe 2 or 3 episodes time to be actually starting to build on the kind of New Falmouth downtown area itself. But at the moment it's just a question of working out some infrastructure, getting it kind of connected up to the game, because at the end of this episode I am actually connected to the game mechanics, so I do have people moving in and cars and traffic and everything else. So that's a bit of a breakthrough, because up until this episode I wasn't really connected up to the game, so the city was almost independent from the game, which is probably not a good idea, because you really need to get it connected and get the traffic in, and see how it kind of functions. So what I'm doing here is putting down some very, very simple intersections. I mean, this is just a standard, vanilla row, well, not vanilla row, but vanilla intersection using Move It to tweak the nodes and segments and so forth. But there's nothing, this is not rocket science what I'm doing here. It's pretty simple stuff. But for my needs, I think this is how I'm going to be doing most of the road connections, intersections and so forth for highways. I did look at the CSUR mod. I think it's CSUR mod, which is a hugely complicated looking mod. And I think it's mainly for Chinese intersections and highways and things. And to be honest with you, I kind of thought that I'd probably just avoid it, because I think I'd need to spend a considerable amount of time trying to learn it. And also, I don't know if it uses a lot of RAM, I've heard, and I don't know if I'm really that worried about trying to, using up all my memory on a mod. So I decided against that. I decided to just go it the old-fashioned route. The one thing I am doing, though, as you can see here, is putting down some signs and POing them. And the reason for that is I want to try and make it look a little bit more individual and try and give it a little bit of character to the highways, because the highways are the key roads that you're going to be looking at. So I thought if I put some signs down and maybe put down some of the future place names that I'm going to. So you can see here Hunterstown and Mason's Hill, which is probably going to be up in the hills more. Mount Gordon, which I've already got ideas for that, which I'll be explaining a little bit more maybe in a couple of episodes time, and put some signs down and really just try and give the highways a little bit more detail. So the next part of the build, once I got that intersection built, you can see it's quite a big area, that, but I'm still left with this part of the map, which has been hemmed in really by the intersection and also by this railway line. Now this railway line is going to be a commuter and freight line. So it's not the main line into the city, but it is still a rail connection. I've already got plans for this little bit of area here that I'm working on, and that you will be seeing in the next episode. It involves a bespoke power plant. So that's going to be happening in episode 6, a bespoke power plant, which I'm quite excited about because I have found one that I want to try and model on, or copy in some respects, or model off, let's say, a power plant that I've already found on Google Maps. So that's what I want to be doing in episode 6. But going back to this episode, what I'm doing here is adding some more roads in. This road is quite important because it's actually connecting up to the roads in my kind of oil depot and industrial area. At the moment, this area wasn't connected to the map, so now it is. And the other thing I felt I needed to do is just add a little bit more detail to the area immediately behind this oil depot. I've added in or extended the existing oil depot and introduced some more sort of pipes and details. I think if you can add these pipes so that you link your different areas together, especially things like oil depots or oil refineries, by adding those pipes in, it really does help to tie everything together much better. So that was something I wanted to do, and as usual got a little bit carried away with PO by putting all these little details in, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do at the end of the day. The other thing about the oil depot build, particularly this time, is there's quite a few areas that I've left fairly empty, and the reason for that is twofold, really. You can see here what I'm doing is adding quite a lot of detail in, which is what I've been doing certainly for the rest of the oil depot area. But when I looked online, there are sort of areas that are pretty empty when you look on Google Maps and so forth. And it might be that they're just redundant areas, old areas that are now derelict. Might be sort of yards and sort of car parks and things like that. And cities do have areas that are pretty much, pretty empty. It's not just a question of filling every single available space with a building. Sometimes you do get just big concrete blocks. You don't get buildings filling every block. So that's something that I've been quite keen to do on this series, or this episode rather. You will see in the cinematics at the end some quite big areas that are just left vacant, and that's fine. But when you're doing those big sort of empty areas, the danger is you can make them look a little bit unrealistic. You always do have to add some kind of detail. Now usually that just takes the form of some decals placed in strategic areas, and that will help to break up the sort of monotony, particularly if it's concrete like this. You don't have any detail at all. And the other thing you can do is just place down a few key details. So things like little bollards, maybe some lights, some sort of floodlights if it's a yard or something. Just a few little containers here or there, and that's often good enough. You don't need to spend too long. So that was something I've done a bit on this episode. I don't really show that on the footage here, but certainly cinematics you probably see some areas that I've left fairly empty, I guess you could call it. And certainly some of the other episodes also there's a big area that I've left sort of vacant. So don't feel like you have to fill out every single part of your city. And also from a practical perspective, it takes so long to do these sort of builds. Sometimes you just, I just get fed up with it and I want to do something a bit different, or I can't be bothered to do an area. So by just leaving them vacant and adding a few key details, it can actually help your own kind of like inspiration, I guess. But with certainly these sort of builds, the best thing to do for me, if I do lose sight of what I'm doing or just lose motivation and inspiration, is to have a look on Google Maps or just fly about Google Earth. That particularly is very good because you can see stuff three-dimensionally, and often I'll find I come away with some ideas for builds and areas and what I want to do. So have a look on those just to keep things fresh as well. And also it helps with the realism by having a look on Google Maps, because you can see how sort of road layouts function, junctions or details, things like industrial areas, so on and so forth. Really keeps your sort of thought processes quite fresh. Particularly if you do struggle sometimes, which I do struggle sometimes for ideas and inspiration. There's no harm, I think, in kind of replicating real world details that you see, because they'll often be replicated anyway. So if you can, if you see something you really like, try and copy it in the game. I think that can kind of help how you work your city out and build your city. But what I'm doing here is adding a few more oil tanks, oil storage tanks, trying to some extent fill up these areas, but also being aware that I don't have to fill everything up. I can keep those certain areas empty. But adding some sort of assets, the assets are obviously pre-made. As I say, it is, I think, important to try to connect all those various parts of the build together. So things like these tanks, I wanted to connect these pipes or make it look as if the pipes were connecting, so that again it looks visually like everything is all sort of linked together, and that will just make everything more cohesive as a build if you can try and do that. It takes a bit longer, I grant you, and obviously I'm using PO for a lot of this, which makes life a heck of a lot easier. But you can probably do most of what I'm doing with Move It. I mean, you're not going to be able to scale stuff like what I did with that little detail there, but you can nevertheless put these objects in and to some extent move them around and get them in position. I mean, this is just a sort of air conditioning plant, I think, which I put in, but it looks, you know, it looks all right. It just sits in there and gives the appearance that those pipes are kind of somehow connecting up to that big, you know, oil storage tanks there. So yeah, all fun. I mean, all these details I'll have to do, but as I say, there's a payoff, a trade-off. I'm aware that PO is fairly heavy, I think, on my system, so I'm trying to limit it as much as I can. If I don't need to do it, I'm just using Move It, like in this case. I don't need to obviously edit these wagons. And adding some, you know, these are just props, just putting them in, and making it look like these are kind of little oil wagons here, sort of parked up. But I think this turned out pretty well. I mean, I'm now pretty certain I've finished this oil depot. It's quite a big area actually when you look at the map, and I could have extended it even more if I'd wanted to. The one in particular that I was looking at for inspiration was considerably bigger than this, but I felt it's probably kind of big enough, and I wanted to move on to a different type of build. So what you'll be seeing in a minute is a kind of residential area that I decided to sort of shoehorn into this little area here, this little space here. It really is wedged in between the rail line there and the oil depot itself. There's a few little shops and things, and I wanted to put some houses down, and a few more houses will be plopped down in a minute or two as well. But yeah, I mean, the sort of style that I'm going for is a kind of Victorian feel. The houses, a lot of them will be these sort of Victorian timber-clad buildings, not really kind of East Coast. This is very much, West Coast. This is very much an East Coast city, so it's an older city visually. There will, of course, be modern buildings and modern houses as well, but a good percentage of the residential houses in New Falmouth will be older, so they will be sort of Victorian era, or certainly early 20th century. Then again, this little fire station here that I wanted to put down because I quite like this asset. So this is obviously functioning as a fire station. I do have some mods that I've used, the No Fires mod, which I'm not sure if that's actually working for me at the moment, because I still seem to be getting issues with fires, so that's something I might have to look at. And also a few other mods I'm using to limit some of the utilities, or the need for utilities. So for example, I'm using no water pipes mod, I think it's called, which means that I don't have to place down loads and loads of water pipes underneath the city, because I think that uses up some of my nodes and segments possibly. So I want to limit that. And also, you know, who really enjoys laying water pipes? I mean, I'm not playing this game to play the game, if you know what I mean. I'm playing this game to create stuff, so I don't want to be hemmed in by all the game mechanics too much. So this is the last part of the build today, the last part of this episode, and it's a little residential area, which I guess is a little peculiar because it's off the main road into the oil depot there. But nevertheless, I wanted to put down a residential area on the riverside here. And the way I'm doing these kind of residential areas, I'm plopping these houses down and then positioning them on the road to my liking, and then putting down some straightforward network fences and a few hedges here and there. I'm not going to be putting down fences and hedges on every single plot, so you'll notice when I start to do that, only every other house or so has a fence and hedge around it. But then combining that with putting trees and shrubs and bushes and things, you can give the impression that all of those houses have independent lots, independent gardens. And I think that's good enough detail. You know, I'm not going too heavy on the detail because I'm aware I'm going to be using up all my my memory and having problems with it lagging and so forth. But yeah, so we are now at the end of this episode, guys. So thank you very much. Do subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and to keep up with update to everything, and do like the video if you enjoyed it this week. And I shall be seeing you in episode number 6. Remember, guys, Bespoke Power Plant, episode 6. Bye for now. Cheers.